"You were never part of the plan, Linnea." Those 8 words, spoken in a hospital hallway at 11 o'clock, on the same night her mother stopped breathing, came from Reed Harmon, 42-year-old Director of Development at Farrow & Crest Hospitality and husband of 6 years, while he held a sealed white envelope in one hand and kept the other very carefully at his side. Cassandra Rue, 31, architectural consultant for the Alderman Hotel project, and the woman who had been standing closer to Reed than her title required for the past 4 months, waited near the elevator bank 3 steps behind him. She wore a camel coat and an expression that stopped just short of sympathy. Linnea Farrow Harmon, 37, stood outside the ICU where her father's monitors beeped low and urgent through the closed glass. She had slept in a hospital chair for 11 days. Her hair was pulled back with a rubber band she had found in her coat pocket. The envelope Reed was holding was white and formal, and some part of her brain still believed it might be a card. It was not a card. Petition for dissolution of marriage, filed 3 days earlier. 3 days earlier, while she was sitting beside her mother's bed in the cardiac wing and listening to a machine count breaths, Reed had been in an attorney's office filing divorce papers. He told her he had been unhappy for 2 years. He told her a man building the kind of career he was building needed a partner who could stand beside him in the rooms that mattered. He said Cassandra understood what ambition actually cost, and that Cassandra was willing to pay it. He said Linnea had never belonged in those rooms to begin with. Tilda Owens, 35, Linnea's closest friend since college, and the only person outside a sealed legal trust who understood the full shape of Linnea's marriage, had stepped out of the ICU waiting room just in time to hear the last of it. Her face went very still in the way it did when she was deciding between speaking and doing something worse. Linnea did not scream, she did not reach for him, and she did not beg. She only looked at the papers, then at Cassandra standing near the elevator, and asked one quiet question. "You chose tonight." Reed's expression shifted towards something that looked like inconvenience. He said the timing was unfortunate, but that it would have been crueler to wait. He said he needed clarity before the Alderman grand opening. He said Cassandra was the future. Then he left. Both of them walked to the elevator, and the doors closed, and Linnea stood alone in the corridor outside her dying father's room, holding divorce papers that smelled like a stranger's office. What Reed Harmon did not know, what he had never cared enough to learn in 6 years of marriage, was that the Alderman Hotel project he had spent 18 months presenting to investors, claiming in boardrooms, and now building a future around, was funded, approved, and majority-owned by the woman he had just handed papers to in a hospital hallway. Through Cornerstone Trust, a private holding entity her parents had established when Linnea was 19 years old, Linnea Farrow Harmon was the silent majority owner of Farrow & Crest Hospitality. The company her parents had started with 2 small inns on the Vermont border and built steadily across 2 decades into an 11-property boutique hotel group worth $220 million. Reed had a title, Director of Development, an office on the 14th floor, an expense account, and his name at the top of the Alderman proposal. He worked for her. He just didn't know it. The reason for that was not deception, and it was not a trap. Linnea's parents, Clifton Farrow, 71, the company's founder, who had been admitted to the same hospital for cardiac failure 12 days earlier and was still in the room directly beside Augusta's, and Augusta Farrow, 68, Farrow & Crest's first creative director, and the woman who had chosen the specific blue-green color that still appeared on every keycard in every property, had taught their daughter one thing about power, before she was old enough to understand what it meant. Let people meet your character first. If they only look up when they find out what you're worth, they were never safe near it. Clifton had placed the first Cornerstone Trust document in Linnea's hands at 22 and told her it was not a gift. It was a responsibility that came with one specific instruction. Keep it separate from your personal life until the personal life has proven it deserves to be trusted. Linnea had married Reed 6 years ago, believing he was the exception. He had been different then, hungry but not ruthless, ambitious but not cold. He had looked at her across a quiet dinner table early in their relationship and said that all he wanted was to build something that mattered, and to have someone beside him who believed he could. She had believed him. That belief was the thing that followed her, now, through the hospital's automatic doors and into the cold Chicago night, where Tilda was already waiting beside a running car with the kind of expression that meant she had chosen not to say the thing she most wanted to say. Augusta Farrow passed away at 4:17 in the morning. Linnea was holding her hand. Clifton was still alive in the next room when the nurse came in. He was too fragile to be told until sunrise. When the doctor gently relayed the news that morning, Clifton asked only one question. Was Linnea all right? That small, fatherly question nearly broke her more than anything Reed had said. She had sent Reed 3 messages before her mother died. One when the doctor called for immediate family, one when the monitors changed, one that said only her mother was asking for him. He had read all 3. He had not responded to any of them. Farrow and Crest Hospitality moved quietly through the preparations for a major opening in the weeks that followed. The Alderman, a 15-story boutique property in Chicago's River North neighborhood, was scheduled for its grand opening gala in 6 weeks. 500 guests, every investor the company had, industry press, board members, and streaming and media partners all confirmed. Reed's name appeared in every program bio, every release, every investor summary as the lead development executive. He had approved his own name in those materials without notifying anyone above him in the structure. Claudine Ware, 54, Chief Financial Officer of Farrow and Crest, and a woman who had worked alongside Clifton and Augusta for 19 years, sat across from Linnea in the company's private conference room 1 week after Augusta's death and placed a stack of financial reports on the table between them without preamble. She did not say she was sorry about Reed. She only said, "When you're ready, there are things you need to see." Linnea was wearing her mother's bracelet, thin gold, 3 small garnets, the one Augusta had worn every day for 30 years. She had taken it from the hospital and put it on, and was not sure she would ever remove it. "I'm ready now," she said. What Claudine had found began with expense reports. Charges listed under creative development on the Alderman account that had nothing to do with creative development. A 3-night stay in the hotel's pre-opening soft launch suite, reference to Cassandra Rue as the occupying guest, approved under Reed's production budget. Wardrobe charges coded as press assets. Restaurant bills submitted as team meals for meetings that had not occurred. A consulting invoice paid to a company with no verifiable address, connected through 2 ownership layers to Orla Rue, 28, Cassandra's younger cousin and a lifestyle blogger who traded access for coverage and had spent the past 6 weeks publishing pieces that shaped Reed into a self-made visionary. Niven Hatch, 40, Farrow and Crest's head of digital compliance and security, placed his tablet beside Claudine's reports and said, without inflection, that Reed's executive credentials had accessed the restricted contract archive at 1:08 in the morning, 11 days earlier. The files accessed included the Cornerstone Trust summary, not the full identity document, but the summary that referenced the trust's controlling interest in the company. Someone had been looking for something. Devlin Cass, 63, the Farrow family's attorney and the executor of Cornerstone Trust, had driven from Evanston that same morning. He sat at the head of the table and confirmed that the prenuptial agreement Reed had signed. Before the wedding included an explicit acknowledgement that all Farrow family trust assets remained separate property. Reed had been advised by independent counsel. He had waived the full review and signed anyway, assuming the Farrow family's old hotel investments were modest. He had never asked what they were worth. Can he take anything from the trust through the divorce? Linnea asked. Nothing, Devlin said. She exhaled once slowly, then she looked at the access log. Then we do this correctly, she said. There was a second thread. It was the one that mattered most. Tilda had mentioned Felix Ando, 25, a young interior designer who had submitted concept work through Farrow and Crest's emerging talent program 18 months earlier. His name appeared in the Alderman project documentation in a footnote, listed as junior research contributor, a credit so minor it barely constituted acknowledgement. Linnea asked Niven to pull the original submission. Felix Ando's portfolio, filed under the program's standard non-disclosure, timestamped and logged in the intake system, contained the full design language of what was now being presented publicly as the Alderman's signature experience, the lobby's living wall centerpiece, the warm underlighting architecture. The room color palette built around the specific blue-green from the Farrow keycard, not as a reference to company heritage, simply taken and repurposed without credit or compensation. The concept that Reed had presented to the investment committee as his own creative breakthrough, the one that had secured 3 additional partners and $40 million in new funding. It was Felix Ando's idea. All of it. Felix came to the office on a Thursday afternoon carrying a canvas bag and the particular posture of someone who had already spent months being told his experience did not count. He was 25 and looked younger in the way people do when they have learned to make themselves small in professional spaces. His jacket had a small ink stain near the left pocket. He kept pulling his sleeve over it. When Linnea placed his original portfolio beside the Alderman design brief on the table, he went very still. You knew, she said. I tried to say something. He looked at the document side by side. Prentice Cagg told me I should be grateful for the research credit, that people like me don't get offered the same room twice. A pause. I thought that was how it worked here. Linnea set her hand flat on his original portfolio, careful and deliberate. My mother spent 30 years making sure it didn't work that way, she said. Not in this company. Felix looked at her for a long moment. Something in his face moved from braced to uncertain. Uncertain was better. It meant he was still deciding. Will you protect me if I go on record? He asked. Yes, Linnea said. And we'll protect the work too. She did not elaborate, but Devlin understood, Claudine understood, Niven understood. This was no longer a wife's grief. This reached into the foundation her parents had built the company on, into the precise reason Farrow and Crest had existed in the first place. The grand opening gala was 11 days away. Across town, in an apartment, Farrow and Crest was quietly subsidizing under a guest relations line item that Claudine had just flagged as unauthorized. Reed was sitting across from Vale Corden, 44, a hospitality industry journalist known for turning ambitious executives into careful myths, under 3 studio lights. Reed adjusted his jacket and looked at the camera with practiced ease. Ambition only works if you're willing to own the vision completely, he said. I didn't wait for the company to catch up to my thinking. I brought them forward. Cassandra stood behind the camera line in ivory. She smiled when he finished the sentence, as though she had written it herself. Orla sat in the corner, typing before the interview was even over. The piece she published 2 days later used the word visionary 4 times and mentioned, in a parenthetical, that Reed's previous marriage had been to a private woman who preferred to stay out of the spotlight, and that his creative renewal had coincided with a clearer sense of personal direction. She did not name Linnea, she didn't need to. Niven added the article to the evidence file. The payment trail from Orla's consulting invoice to the shell company back to the Farrow and Crest publicity budget was already documented. The article was now part of a pattern. Company resources used to elevate Reed's image, fund his affair, and preemptively damage his wife's credibility. Claudine asked Linnea a second time whether the opening should be cancelled. Cancelling protects him, Linnea said. He would call it grief. He would call it a scorned wife making a scene. He would call it exactly what Orla is already setting up. She looked at the conference room table. The gala has every investor we have, every board member, every press partner, every industry contact he lied to. Claudine's expression shifted from careful to understanding. Let him walk in, Linnea said. On the night before the opening, Reed called Linnea from a number she didn't recognize. His voice was smooth in the way it got when he had rehearsed a conversation. I don't want tonight to become something it doesn't have to be, he said. You should stay home, take care of yourself. Linnea looked at the signed authorization papers on her desk. Her mother's bracelet caught the lamplight. Her father's compass sat beside the papers, small, brass, worn smooth at the edges, the one Clifton had carried during the company's first site searches in Vermont, the one he had pressed into her palm from his hospital bed and said, True North, you always know where it is. I wouldn't miss it, she said. On the other end, Reed exhaled with the particular ease of a man who had already decided how the evening would go. The cameras outside the Alderman lit up when Reed stepped out of the car. Cassandra was at his side before both his feet were on the sidewalk. She wore deep green and stood exactly where a wife would have stood. Close enough to announce something, precise enough to still look professional in photographs. Orla was at the press line before they reached the door. Inside, the ballroom was everything the design concept had promised, because it was Felix Ando's design concept down to the living wall installation rising 14 feet behind the reception bar, lit from beneath in the specific blue-green that had lived on Farrow keycards for 3 decades. Reed moved through the room like a man who had built it with his own hands. Linnea arrived through the side entrance. She wore a plain, dark dress, her mother's bracelet, her father's compass in her coat pocket. She had not dressed for cameras, and the cameras did not find her. She moved through the staff corridor and into the ballroom's edge, partly in shadow, with her chairwoman credential tucked inside her coat. Devlin walked beside her. Claudine followed with a tablet. Niven moved through the room without making eye contact with anyone, checking badges and exits and the placement of every legal aid he had stationed near the doors. Tilda stayed close enough that Linnea could feel her presence without looking. Felix was near the back of the ballroom in a suit that fit him better than the one he had worn to the office meeting. He was still nervous, but he had come, and he had stayed, and those were the 2 things that mattered. Vale Corden served as host for the evening remarks. She introduced Reed. The applause was real. built on 18 months of Reed standing in front of these same people and telling them a story they had every reason to believe. Reed walked to the stage and let the applause run longer than it needed to. He spoke about vision and pressure and refusing to be held back by people who couldn't imagine the scale of what he was trying to build. He said that real partnerships were rare and that he was grateful to have found one. He thanked Cassandra by name. He called her the woman who understood what this cost. He did not say Linea's name. In the projection booth at the rear of the ballroom, Niven stood beside the confirmation terminal. Devlin had the authorization code. Neither man moved until Devlin's phone buzzed with a single word. Now. The presentation screen behind the stage went dark. Reed turned, still holding the podium. The Pharaoh and Crest corporate legal seal appeared. Not the event logo, not the gala design, the seal. A line appeared beneath it. Before tonight's program continues, Pharaoh and Crest Hospitality is required to present verified findings connected to this project. The ballroom went silent in the particular way that meant every person in it understood, in the same moment, that the evening had changed. The first document appeared, an internal expense record, flagged by the audit committee, showing a 3-night stay charged to the Alderman Creative Development account. Guest name, Cassandra Rue. Approved by Reed Harmon. Reed said, "What is this?" It was not a question. It was the beginning of something unraveling faster than he could decide which end to grab. The next slide showed the shell company payment trail connected to Orla Rue's consulting invoice, traced back through a Pharaoh and Crest publicity budget line. Then badge access logs showing Cassandra's late-night entry into the restricted contract floor under Reed's credentials. Then security footage of Cassandra leaving the restricted archive corridor at 1:14 in the morning. Someone in the ballroom whispered, then more people. Cassandra stood from the front row. Reed looked at her, then back at the screen. The next section appeared with a header, Design Attribution Review. Felix Ando's original submission filled the left side of the screen, time-stamped from 18 months prior, filed through the company's official talent program intake system. On the right, the Alderman Signature Experience Brief as presented to the investment committee, the living wall concept, the underlighting specifications, the color palette reproduced across every surface of the room they were standing in the exact blue-green Pharaoh and Crest had used for 30 years. The room required no explanation. The side-by-side comparison explained itself. Felix looked at his hands in his lap. Reed said, louder, his voice cracking at the edges, to shut it down right now. No one moved toward the booth. The next slide was a formal notice, suspended executive access, expense recovery review, credit dispute filing, legal referral to outside counsel, Reed Harmon, Cassandra Rue, Orla Rue, Prentice Cug. The ballroom stayed completely still. Then a recovered audio file played through the house speakers, a voice memo from the restricted project archive, time-stamped 3 weeks earlier. Reed's voice, clear and unhurried. By the time Linnea figures out what I've built here, she'll be too buried in her mother's death to do anything about it. No one spoke for several seconds after it ended. Cassandra sat back down slowly. She did not look at Reed. The final slide appeared. Pharaoh and Crest Hospitality, controlling entity, Cornerstone Trust, majority owner and active chair, Linnea Pharaoh Harmon. The silence after it was different from the silence before. It was not shock. It was recognition, the specific recognition of people understanding that the architecture of the last 18 months had rested on a foundation none of them had been shown. Slowly, the room turned. Reed turned with it. He looked toward the side aisle, toward the woman in the plain dark dress who was now walking steadily toward the front of the ballroom with Devlin on her left and Claudine behind her and Tilda close enough to reach if she was needed. His mouth opened. He said her name quietly, in a way that told the whole room he was hearing something he had refused to listen for in 6 years of marriage. Linnea did not go to the stage. She walked to where Felix was sitting near the back and stopped beside him. That single choice, more than anything else that happened that night, told the room what kind of company Pharaoh and Crest was and what it had always been built to be. She looked at the ballroom. My parents built Pharaoh and Crest to protect the kind of work that gets taken in rooms full of people who believe their title gives them the right, she said. Her voice was level and unhurried. Tonight, this company begins formal proceedings to correct the misconduct connected to this project. The grand opening is suspended pending a full review of design attribution, executive expenses, and publicity ethics. The alderman will open, but it will open with the correct name on the work. She looked at Felix. Felix Ando created the Alderman signature experience, she said. Farrow and Crest formally recognizes him as the originating designer. His contract, compensation and credit will be corrected before this property opens to the public. The applause started with one person near the middle of the room, then another. Then the employees who had known for a long time that something in the project had been wrong and had not had a place to say so. Then the investors who had been misled. Then the board members who had trusted the wrong name in the wrong documents. Reed stood at the front of the room while the applause moved around him without touching him. Cassandra walked toward the side exit. A legal aide stepped quietly into her path and handed her a sealed envelope. Devlin crossed the room and handed Reed an identical envelope. Effective immediately, your access has been suspended pending investigation, he said. Outside counsel will contact you within 48 hours regarding expense recovery and contract review. Reed held the envelope without opening it. His face had the particular quality of a man who had spent a long time believing the story he told about himself, and had just heard it played back to him from the outside. He looked at Linnea one last time. His voice came out smaller than she had heard it in years. You could have told me, he said. Linnea looked at him the way someone looks at a sentence that doesn't mean what the person saying it thinks it means. You never asked who I was, she said. You only decided what I was worth. She turned back toward Felix and Claudine and Devlin, and the room her parents had spent 30 years filling with people whose work deserved to outlast the people who would have taken it. In the weeks that followed, the findings moved through the correct channels. Reed's suspension became a formal company disclosure. The design attribution review was filed. Felix Ando's name appeared in the revised Alderman materials in the place it had always belonged. Orla Rue's access to Farrow and Crest press communications was permanently revoked. Cassandra Rue's contract was terminated with a clawback attached. Prentice Kager resigned before the board could convene. Morton Breek, 57, a board member who had quietly backed Reed's rise as a mechanism to weaken Cornerstone's controlling position, was removed from the ethics subcommittee and left the board 3 weeks later under a separate disclosure. Clifton Farrow was transferred out of the ICU on the same Tuesday that the corrected design credits were filed with the relevant professional registry. He was not yet strong enough to read the paperwork himself, so Linnea sat beside his hospital bed and read it to him. Felix's name in the right place, the Alderman documentation corrected, the shell invoices recovered, the trust intact. When she finished, Clifton was quiet for a long moment, then he pressed her hand. True North, he said. The Alderman Hotel opened on a Thursday in early spring. Felix Ando's name appeared in the program under interior design concept. Not a footnote, not a parenthetical. His name at the right size, in the right place, on the right line. Linnea walked into the lobby through the front entrance. The living wall was exactly as Felix had imagined it, reaching and green, lit from beneath in the blue-green light that had always meant something. The color Augusta Farrow had chosen for 2 small Vermont inns because she believed a place where people rested should feel, from the moment they walked in, like it was glad they had come. Linnea touched the edge of one leaf, very briefly, and looked up at the wall her parents' company had built and nearly lost and held on to. She was not healed. She did not expect to be, not yet. Grief does not leave when justice arrives, but she was standing in the right place, with the right name on the door, for the right reasons. That was enough. Some betrayals do not break a quiet woman. They only show the world why she was quiet, and remind it too late that silence was never the same thing as surrender.